Okay, a few things. Little corrections. I said last class, I think I said that Rav Neria was the Rav of Kfar Haroeh. As soon as the class ended, I realized that that's not true. If I said it, Rav Shal Yisraeli was the Rav of Kfar Haroeh. Rav Neria was the Rav of Bnei Akiva Yeshiva there. And by the way, Kfar Haroeh, the Roeh is Rav Kook. That's the one who sees clearly. Now, as for the dateline, a couple other things here. Thank you, Shmaryahu, Nachum Shmaryahu, who sent me, although he usually corrects me on all, or either corrects or sends me great stuff on Chabad. He's an excellent scholar and everything Chabad, but this comes from the Rav. What do you think the Rav held about the dateline? And what Nachum Shmaryahu sent me is a text, a transcript, basically, of Erwin Shapiro, who was an important person in YU circles, I guess a donor, and he spoke to the Rav about this. And the Rav, he called the Rav because he was going during Sfira, and that's always a question. What do you do during, your Sfira? You miss a day. Now, it's funny that just today, who was it? Eli sent me something where talking about Alaska, and I'll get to Alaska in a minute, that this rabbi says that let's say you leave, let's assume Alaska's the dateline. You leave in the morning, or let's say you're flying, and then it's morning, sunrise, you put tefillin on, and then you cross the dateline, half hour later, you put tefillin on again. I find that hard to believe because I guess Shabbos, you go by the local. I can't see it that you put tefillin on because it's sunrise, and it's the same sunrise. It's still your same day. So I don't look. If one of the great poskim says it, I guess, but I find it hard to believe. So the Rav though asked him, "Well, what about Shabbos?" He says, "I'm not asking you about Shabbos." And then he says they have a minyaner. It's on Shabbos. So the Rav, what does the Rav say? Yeah. So that, but then fine. Then I guess maybe the Rav pushes it, whatever. Because Erwin Shapiro says I don't want to ask regarding Shabbos, but then the Rebbe says, okay, so don't ask me. But then he does ask him about Shabbos. And initially, he says the Rebbe says he doesn't have a solution. The reason why the Rebbe, I think, is challenged in this is because his uncle apparently held like the Chazon Ish Chumrah both days, and Rav Simcha Zelig also thought. This is what I saw in one of the sources that if there's no community there already, you should go like observe it on Shabbos in Japan. But then the Rav, so Erwin Shapiro was saying that you can't really observe it on a different day than the locals do. Hold on. Even though he says the Rav says, this isn't really logical. I think the Rav really thought that it should be Sunday, but then the Rav concludes, okay, keep Shabbos like the local community. He didn't say do both days. He says like the local community. Now, as for Alaska, I think it was Chaim. Remember last class you said that according to Rav Tukashinsky, the western part of Alaska, it already should be a different day, and you should observe Shabbos on a different. So I guess it would be on Friday, and I said I never heard that, and I thought it was new to me. The truth is, I looked it up. Rav Tukashinsky doesn't say that. Rav Tukashinsky has the dateline, what it should be, the longitude. However, he never actually deals with the case of Alaska, and he could have been. Yes, it goes right through Alaska, but the Chazon Ish's opinion also goes right through, and the place's land. And the Chazon Ish held though that it's something called Greira, that you don't. One piece of land goes like everyone else. You don't split the land so that I'm on one side and I can cross over to the other side with one step on a different date line. Rav Tukachinsky, he doesn't say we do that, but he doesn't say we don't do that. So at most, it's a suffix. But Rav Tukachinsky absolutely never says that Alaska is split. Truth is, I don't even know if Rav Tukachinsky knew when he gave his idea that it went through Alaska. He was just doing it in terms of the degrees. And finally, about this, I thank Moshe from Lakewood. He calls my attention to the following. Maybe he's with us now because he thinks that, as he put it, this letter I'm going to show you is a reaction to what's become mainstream. What's become mainstream, even among the more right-wing, I gather, is that you go to Japan and you observe it like the local Kehillah does. So this document just appeared a couple months ago. It's actually quite shocking when you think about it. It says as follows. It's signed by Reb Miller from Toronto, and also Rav Hillel David, Rabbi Wachtfogel, Rav Aaron Feldman, Shmuel Meir Katz, really the right wing in the Haredi world. And their ruling, I'll just read the English. The Hebrew is a little more nuanced, but it says you should follow the view of the Chazon Ish and the Brisker Rav that the day begins on the eastern edge of the Asian continent. As such, China and Korea, it's on Saturday, but then they say in Japan, Shabbos should be observed on Sunday. Now, as far as I know, the Brisker Rav held also on Shabbos, the Arises. But okay, the Chazon Ish. And he says this ruling applies to Chumrah and Kula. Although there were posting who disagree with the Chazon Ish and placed the Dateline in the Pacific Ocean, and one may wish to be stringent to observe Shabbos in Japan and similar occasions also on their Saturday, this should be no more than a personal chumrah, a personal stringency. So here we see that these poskim say, not like Rav Elyashiv. I thought Rav Elyashiv was the Posek Ador. Rav Elyashiv says, no, you observe in Japan on Shabbos, but and we saw when he was asked about this, he added in addition that to do the Doraisas on Sunday, not like the Chazon Ish. And here you have these poskim who say just the opposite, that you have to do like the Chazon Ish, even Lakula, that means even on Saturday, you drive, you do everything you want. If you want to do a personal chumrah, then on Saturday, you can also observe. But they say that, and this is what Chaim Kanievsky says as well, that Saturday is a Yom Chol in Japan. So I find it a little interesting because I know the Chazon Ish is a great figure. You can certainly rely on him, but it does seem the minhag is not like him. And Rav Elyashiv, I mean, in his lifetime, at least, Rav Elyashiv was the Posek Acharon, and he absolutely disagreed with the Chazon Ish on this. And so thank you very much. I don't know if we do a Torah in motion trip, we're gonna have to come up with what we do here. I assume we'll go like Minhag HaMakom. There are people listening to us who've been to Japan, and many, so well they can tell us later what they did. Okay, one more thing before we begin. One of you asked a very good question. Did you listen to the tape I played your Fabian show from Aaron Cutler at the Pioneer Hotel? And we saw there that non-Jews were doing the cooking, and Rav Aaron corrected him and said, from now on, you can't have the non-Jews. Let me just see. Judy, you asked, aren't I discussing the Langer affair? Yeah, but I get to it slowly. Now, this is we're just picking up previous comments. Some people say this is the most interesting for them, but okay, we'll be at the Langer affair in 3 minutes. So someone asked, well, what about the dishes? Or the cake? I shouldn't say dishes, because dishes could be klisheni, klishishi, whatever. Certainly the pots. Don't you have to kosher all the pots? Isn't that the halacha when a non-Jew cooks kosher pots? You have to kosher them. And Rav Aaron never said to kosher the pots. He just said from now on. So it happens to be, if I may say so, a good question. Let me show you. Hold on, I'll show you the Shulchan Aruch on this. Here you have it in Yoredea. Hold on, I marked it down here. Kuf Yod Gimel Tezayin. Yes, so if you look at Kuf Yod Gimel Tezayin, it says explicitly here. Kalim, you have vessels in which a non-Jew has cooked in front of us, things which are subject to the prohibition of non-Jewish cooking need to be made kosher. You have to kosher them. Then the Shulchan Aruch says there are those who say it's not necessary. However, we have a klal that if you have the halacha and then when it says yesh omrim, we assume that it's like the first opinion, and therefore, according to this, you would need to, unless it's for Ramah says for non-Jew cooking for someone who's sick on Shabbos. That's why it's not an issue like when people in Israel, elderly people, have a helper or something. So according to this, yes, they should have koshered it. So why didn't Rav Aaron? Well, because if you look before, you see otherwise. Look in Halacha 4. The Halacha I just read you was just talking about a non-Jew that you know who cooks in your pots. But it says in 4, Yesh Misha Matir, there are those who permit cooking by our non-Jewish maids. And then there are also those who are forbidden even b'diavad. Now, remember, we have this. There's two opinions. This opinion of it's often mentioned as the Ravad, but it's really Rav Avram. I don't think it's Rav Ravad who says that servants, there's no Bishul Akum. So we've discussed that a bit where we assume there is. So let's leave that. But look at the Ramah. Uvadi Avad, after the fact, Yesh Lismoch al Divrei Hamatiri. And the Ramah says after the fact, you can rely on those that permit. So if the people in the Pioneer Hotel cooked after the fact, it's okay. And then he says, he goes on, even in our own houses with our servants who cook, he says we allow them to cook because we're involved with it. It's not like today where they say you have to dafka light the fire. He says because as they're cooking, you're going to be involved. Now, it's true that if you look in the commentaries here on the Shulchan Aruch, the Shach, he thinks that the Shulchan Aruch itself is referring to an actual eved that you buy. But that's not what the Ramah is referring to. He's referring to, they didn't have slaves, Christian slaves in Poland. He's referring to the maid servants that you pay. And if you look in the commentaries, they explain this is the view that we've spoken about this, that there's no Bishul Akum with hired help. So we have a lot of different opinions. On the one hand, you have the idea that like factories, they're making food in China or Mexico. How could that possibly be Bishul Akum? I think the Hashgachas assume it is, even though Ramosha said it's not, because there's no chance of any intimacy. And then we have people actually in your house and then you have the middle ground, like a restaurant. In theory, at least in a restaurant, you could bring someone, you could ask the waiter, bring the chef to me. The food was so good, as opposed to someone across the world where there's literally no connection. But we see here that the Ramah says, b'diavad, hired help, it's not a problem. So Rav Aaron could certainly rely on that. Hefsed Mammon, all sorts of things. Okay, my friends. Let us pick up here. I think the last thing I said, or the second to last thing I said, was that how the Langer dispute was now front page news. We spoke about Moshe Dayan making it a big story. So now let me add, this is going on at the same time that Rav Goren is running for chief rabbi of the state of Israel. And he had already distributed the booklet, which I mentioned last week. And I looked after the class, I looked on the Jewish National, what they call it now, Israel National Library website, and you can get a copy if you go to Israel. But it's in all his arguments, which we're going to go through, are repeated in the larger volume. Now, he already produced this booklet that said that the Langer children were not mamzerim. Incidentally, I'm going to share with you next class, because I don't have the book now. I happened to see it over Shabbos in Florida, so I just ordered it. But Rav Aaron Soloveitchik says that if you know that someone's a mamzer, you're not supposed to say anything. And that's a tradition. So I'm going to try, you can help me out on this maybe. I'm not exactly sure how this works then with the idea of keeping records of all these sorts of things. In other words, these people are married. Then you move, let's say, to Providence. You're living, let's say, in New York. And lo and behold, then, they never got divorced because the guy ran off or something. And then the woman shows up in your town, and lo and behold, then she marries someone and has children. They're mamzerim. Rav Aaron says you don't say anything. So it's as if unless there's a chalus or a declaration of a beis din declaring it, there's no issue. I don't know what other examples we have of cases. Well, I guess we do. I mean, if you're Eid Echad, if you're a 1A, then you know that something happened. The beis din doesn't accept your opinion, even if you're Moshe Rabbeinu. But I'll share you that source next class when we get into the whole issue of mamzerus. So Rav Goren already published a booklet, which he sent to dayanim, asking them to reconsider the matter with all sorts of new evidence, which we're going to go through, because he later published it in his book, that the children were not mamzerim, and he let it be known that if he becomes chief rabbi, he is going to take up the case. He also states that he could not free them unless he was chief rabbi. So if you're being cynical here, this is obviously a signal. This is becoming a huge controversy. It's in the newspapers constantly. Golda Meir is involved, Moshe Dayan. And here Rav Goren is letting the powers that be know that he has a solution. He can solve it. Just have to put me into the chief rabbinate. And this was the reason that he was supported by Golda Meir for chief rabbi. Now, his opponents, of course, said that he was using this as a form of bribery, that, that he quid pro quo. You elect me chief rabbi and I'll solve this problem. In fact, there were rumors that an actual deal had been reached, not just he's alluding to it, but an actual deal that if he's made chief rabbi, he's going to solve the Labor Party's problem, because it was creating a big problem for them. Because they don't want to get involved in these religious issues, and their constituency is pushing now to have civil marriage, this is that, and that's they can't do that because they need the support of the religious Zionist party, the Mizrahi party in their coalition. So they just want this whole thing to go away. Now, even if there wasn't an actual deal, which Rav Goren, of course, denied, the labor leadership, and in those days, till Begin comes to power, every government's a labor government. The labor leadership supports Rav Goren, knowing that he will solve the Langer case. He already said he could solve it. And this was the major reason for their support, which led to his becoming chief rabbi, or a major reason. Now, this, of course, raised the issue of bribery in the eyes of Rav Goren's opponents. There's bribery of money, and then there's other forms of bribery. If you are saying, hey, Rabbi Goren, if you solve this problem, we'll elect you as chief rabbi, that's a form of bribery. We all know that. We all lived through Hunter Biden and what went on with that. So that's a form of bribery. In fact, let me show you something here. And dayanim need to be very careful about this. Not only those on the Sanhedrin, all dayanim. Look what it says in Rambam, Hilchos Sanhedrin, chapter 2, Halacha 7. And he's not only speaking about members of the Sanhedrin. Members of the Sanhedrin, he gives all the things they need to do, but look what he says in Halacha 7. We are not, he says, in the regular court of 3, you don't have to have all the things that he says the dayanim need to have in a Sanhedrin, that he can't be an old man, or he can't, they have to know this, people have to know languages, all these sorts of things. What does it say? Nevertheless, any dayan, I wonder, do our dayanim have this? But any dayan needs to have these qualities, 7 attributes: wisdom, humility, fear of God, loathing for money, that's sinas mamon, a love for truth, a person who's beloved by the people at large and have a good reputation. Okay, so it says sinas mamon. When Rabbi Maimon, Yehuda Leib Maimon, was the big Mizrahi leader, he was minister of religions, he wanted to create a Sanhedrin. That was also a big controversy. So the story is that he was asked, well, we know that people in the Sanhedrin, by the way, it's not just that, they need to have sinas mamon, as we saw. It's not just the Sanhedrin, any basin. Okay, but that's a little harder to find. But they asked him about a Sanhedrin. Where are you going to find dayanim in today's day and age who we can honestly say have sinas mamon, really a loathing for money? And Rav Maimon replied, it's not a problem. Today's day and age, money can buy you everything. So obviously it's a joke, but the point is that, this is a big concern for dayanim, and Rav Goren opened him up to the charge. And the Haredi community launched a campaign against him. And I showed you this before, and I'll show you it again. Here is the document, which was signed by all these rabbis. Doesn't mention Rav Goren by name, but it's trying to say that he's not qualified. Signed by Yecheskel Abramsky, the Stipler, Rav Shach, Rav Chaim Shmulevitz, Rav Moshe Chevroni of Chevron. Now Rav Goren is known as the Eloi of Chevron, so that's significant. Rav Yashiv from the Basin, and Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. The government, which was pushing, which wanted Rav Goren, they actually changed the rules of the election for chief rabbinate to help Rav Goren's candidacy. I want to read to you. This comes from Yair Halevi's dissertation. Um, the old rules were, and who pushed this? Zorach Varhaftig and other members of the religious Zionists. This was together with the Labor Party. Originally, the plan was, the way it worked was, let me read this here. In earlier elections, there were 125 members of the group that voted for the chief rabbi. 75 of these would be rabbis. 50 would be just mayors and other citizens. So that's 60% of the electors would be rabbis. They changed it, so now you have 150 people, 80 rabbis and 70 Ishay Tzibur, members of the community, all sorts of figures that were appointed, many of whom were not at all religious. So now it's 53%. So they changed it. Oh, and he says here that Varhaftig wanted to even lower it more to ensure Rav Goren's election. They didn't think Rav Unterman was Zionistic enough. He was a big old Mizrahi figure, but they thought too solicitous of the Haredim. And Rav Unterman had earlier announced, before he was drafted again, but before Rav Goren he had announced his candidacy. He had earlier announced that due to his age, he was not going to run for another term. But pressure was put on him by the Haredim and the Dayanim to run, even though he's 86 years old, because they said we can't have Rav Goren run and become a chief rabbi. And the assumption was that as long as Rav Unterman states that he wants to continue, that Rav Goren would drop out. Because Rav Unterman, he's like the senior rabbi of religious Zionism, 86 years old, still in very good health mentally, and a big Talmid Chacham, and Rav Goren's turn would come, but especially now, it's only going to be for 5 years. So that was the assumption. And the major dayanim attempting to stop Rav Goren's election were Rav Yoshev, dayan Rav Eliezer Goldschmidt, Rav Shaul Yisraeli. Now, these three had been on Batei Din that refused to free the Langer children of the Tainted Mamzerut, and Rav Yoshev and Rav Shaul Yisraeli were on the Beis Din Agadol. We saw that it was Rav Ovadiah Yosef, Rav Yoshev, and Rav Shaul Yisraeli. So they clearly, Rav Yoshev and Rav Shaul Yisraeli, see what Rav Goren is doing as trying to undermine the decision of the Beis Din Agadol. And Rav Shaul Yisraeli, who's also a leading religious Zionist rabbi, is and will remain opposed to Rav Goren. The last dayan of the major dayanim, his name is Rabbi Jolti. This is how it's pronounced, like Volozhin, not even though it's with a Z. I think it's sort of like I work at a Catholic university, not just a Catholic university. I work at a Jesuit university. So when I first got there, I was told, even despite what the dictionary says, it's not Jesuit, like it's Jesuit. Same thing. So Rav Jolti. And here's a picture of Rav Jolti. He's also another Eloi from Hebron. His brother, Rav Michal Jolti, was on one of the lesser Batei Din that also ruled against the children of the Langer children. When he was only 35 years old, as you read here, he was appointed to the Beis Din Agadol. So a major Talmid Chacham, and he would become the major antagonist for Rav Goren. Now, if you read the Wikipedia article, it tells you that in 1961, Ritzi Pesach Frank dies. He's the chief rabbi of Jerusalem, and they couldn't come to a decision, Jerusalem, about another chief rabbi. So 10 years later, there still is no Ashkenazic chief rabbi of Jerusalem. And if you read the article, it tells you that in Hanukkah of 1971, Haredi rabbis and Agudas Yisrael people, they appointed Rav Jolti chief rabbi of Jerusalem, but this is not an official government appointment. This is a pirate appointment, I guess you could call it. And it was only in 1977 that he was officially appointed chief rabbi of Jerusalem. Rav Ovadiah Yosef had a lot to do with that. So at this time that he's opposing Rav Goren, he himself is a bit of a problematic figure because he accepted this unofficial, in opposition to the Moatzah Datit of Jerusalem position. And that's Rav Goren and his allies are able to say, well, what do you expect from Rav Goren? He's trying to destroy the system of the official rabbinate anyway. Now, I want to tell you two things about Rav Jolti. If you look in this book, which I'm so happy I got because it has such great stories, yeah, maybe they should have censored some of the stories, but my attitude is if they didn't censor it, I could use it, and it's 100% okay for me to use it. But if you look at page 351, he tells the story of how Rav Avram Shapiro became a dayan on the Beis Din of Jerusalem. There was a Rabbi Kalmas, he was from Moscow, he retired, and there now was thinking of appointing a Beis Din Agadol of Jerusalem, Rav Goren. Not Rav Goren, sorry, Rav Jolti. Actually, this is before in the 50s, when he was appointed, Rav Jolti was appointed in tell you what year this is, because it said just on the Wikipedia article, yes, in 1956, he's appointed chief rabbi to the Beis Din of Jerusalem. 56, only 36, let's see, he's born in 1920, so 36, 35 years old, it says. Okay, so it turns out that Rav Elyashiv, so the thinking was to put Rav Jolti on Rav Elyashiv's Beis Din. But the story here, Rav Jolti was a redhead. And Rav Elyashiv's mother had this old superstition that that redheads, they're very hot-tempered. I don't know if that's true. I know a redhead, and he's not hot-tempered at all. The whole family of them, and the opposite of hot-tempered. But they got in Europe, maybe there's a superstition. So she said to her son, Rav Elyashiv, you can't sit in the Beis Din with Rav Jolti. He's going to give you tsaris, because anytime he disagrees with you, his hot temper is going to come out. So Rav Jolti comes to Rav Avram Shapiro and says, I want you on my Beis Din. And in the end, it didn't happen that way because Rav Herzog said that he's already made the approach to Rav Jolti, but that's what led Rav Avram Shapiro to become a dayan, because become a dayan. Well, Rosh Hashivas don't usually become dayans. They're two separate roles. The Rosh Hashivas focus on lumdus and things like that. To become a dayan, it's a separate role. So that's one story from this book. The other story is Rav Tzvi Yehuda Kook's reaction to Rabbi Tzalel Jolti's undermining of the official Jerusalem structure and adopting this rabbinate. Now, if you look, this is on page 181, they don't tell you. They just say Rav Meforsam, who was appointed privately, etc. And it's talking about Rav Jolti. And it says Rav Jolti, by the way, used to go to Merkas Harav on Yom Ha'atzmaut, but Rav Tzvi Yehuda was very upset with him, and he said, there's a Yom Ha'atzmaut, he says, or Yom Yerushalayim, I forget here. He said, Rav Tzvi Yehuda Kook says that because he did this, he will not. Lo yashlim et kunat harabanut shelo. Rav Tzvi Yehuda Kook was so furious at him that he spoke very strongly against him. He said, "Habachira shel harav hazeh lo yoter mipurim shpiel." He said that the election of Rav Jolti is like a Purim spiel. And I'm not going to say he cursed him, but he predicted that because of this terrible violation of propriety, he will not complete his rabbinate. And yes, he used to come on Yom Yerushalayim, it says. And I can tell you, he dies in 1982. Now, granted, that's he's in 71, so you're talking 11 years since he's chief rabbi of Jerusalem from the unofficial, but still he was only 62 years old. So if he wanted to see it as a kapeda, in the yeshivas circles, often they speak about a kapeda, that if a great person has an issue with you, could be dangerous. And finally, I'll just mention one more thing, which I learned about Rav Jolti over Shabbos in this book. Just came out. Anyone seen this book? Kashrut Unveiled by Rabbi Chaim Jachter. It's a collection of all his articles dealing with kashrus for many years that appeared in the Jewish Link, and very interesting, full of all interesting articles. Look, as is to be expected, I don't agree with everything, and it's unfortunate that on page, I think 134, he repeats the Bubba Misa that for the FDA, you can put less than 2% of ingredients can go in a product without it being listed on the labels. I don't know who invented this. This is like such an urban myth. It's completely false. The problem is something different, namely that flavorings, natural flavors, but because they're regarded as incidental, but that could have tarfus and has halachic significance. But if you put, let's say, peanuts in, or put potato chips and it's less than 2%, or potatoes, let's say, of course you have to have the ingredients. Everything has to be on the label, unless it's what they call incidental, where they allow you to put it like natural flavors. And if you look online, you'll see the vegans are all upset with this. It seems to be that the companies, it's their influence because they don't want to give up their secret recipes and everything. Uh, but he tells us on, and you people, we have people in Israel also who could help me on this. He tells us on page 170 to 170, well, on 173, he tells us a Rav Jolti instituted the chief rabbinate of Jerusalem's two-tiered system of Regilah and Mahadran. Interesting, he says Jerusalem's chief rabbi in the late 1970s, because before that, he didn't actually have an office. He wasn't paid by the government. But then he says as follows, the CRC, that's the Chicago Rabbinical Council, does not include Rabbinate Mahadran on its list of recommended kashrut agencies. That's the first I've heard. That now we're being told that Rabbanut Mahadran of Jerusalem is not considered recommended. I mean, that's every hotel, other than I guess the Waldorf. I think they have something else, but certainly it's the Inbal, the David Citadel. I ate with Rabbi Lau together at the David Citadel. We ate in the same room. So I don't know that now Orthodox Jews are being told that Rabbanut Mahadran is not good enough. And he quotes someone from the CRC as saying that in Israel, even Mahadran places, although it doesn't apply to a hotel does have a mashgiach there all the time. I can tell you at the Inbal, the rabbi's there. He says that he visited Israeli establishments of Mahadran, and there is not a constant presence of a Shomer Shabbos Jew. And this is a basic requirement of all American kashrut agencies. But okay, well, I'll just say two things. First of all, in America, meat restaurants, it's very easy to walk across the street and buy a Purdue chicken. In Israel, you need to get a non-kosher piece of meat. It's not so simple. Most of the meat there is kosher, and according to halacha, you don't really need to have mashgiach tamidi. And the Mahadran they're coming in a lot. They're not like the regular. So I don't know. You'll have to text me, email me later this idea that now Mahadran is not good enough. So first I heard of it. I can tell you though, absolutely, there are things in Israel which do not, even Mahadran, which because it is Mahadran. When I was asked, I was told it's Mahadran, the Inbo, or maybe it's the meat is Mahadran, and maybe the place. No, but the David Citadel, it's the Rabbi Lau ate there. I remember the Hashkachan in front said Mahadran. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it's definitely Mahadran. These Jerusalem Mahadran. Rabbi Lau ate there. I'm talking about David Citadel, but they absolutely, and I've seen this at both the Inbal and at the Orient, and I spoke to the Mashgiach in both places. Non-Shomer Shabbos pour the wine that is not mavushal. Absolutely, they do. And they both mashgichim. If you know the Inbal, you know the guy. He runs the shul there. He's the mashgiach, and also at the Orient. And you can have the mashgiach pour it for you, but they assume that, and this is Ravadia's psak, that you don't need a Shomer Shabbos. So that in that area, the American hashgachot are stricter. But if I'm wrong, and please correct me, if these hotels are only Mahadran meat, but not Mahadran everything, you can let me know. But as far as I know, that's not the case. And as I said, Rabbi Lau, who I assume would only eat Mahadran, he was digging in also. I was supposed to go in a couple weeks, and then something came up with my wife's work, so I can't. So anyone who's there now, you can check. Okay, let's get back to our story. When it became clear that Rav Goren was going to be elected chief rabbi, the dayanim in opposition to Rav Goren felt that they needed a counter to him. You can't just have, because Rav Nissim, remember, Rav Nissim is on Rav Goren's side. He wanted him to come up with a hector for the Langer children, and they were basically running together. And Rav Goren doesn't back down when Rav Unterman says he wants to run for chief rabbinate as well. So they recruit a great Talmid Chacham who's also serving as chief rabbi of Tel Aviv together with Rav Goren, Rav Ovadiah Yosef. Now, Rav Nissim is also chief rabbi, and he's running again. So what gives permission for Rav Goren and Rav Ovadiah to run for chief rabbinate, to unseat sitting rabbis? Well, Rav Ovadiah discusses it in this volume, Yabia Omer, volume 9. I think this is the last Yabia Omer he published. I think there's a volume 10. I have it. Volume 10 was published posthumously, though. And if you look in section Choshen Mishpat, number 9, dated from Chol Moed Sukkos, Tafshin Lamed Gimel, 1972, Sukkos, Rav Ovadiah deals with this. Why was I permitted to unseat a sitting rabbi? And he tells the whole story, that the chief rabbi was the Hagaon Rav Unterman. He was asked by the great rabbis of Israel to run again in opposition to the other candidate, Hagaon Rav Shlomo Goren. So he gives them all the titles. And what was the reason? The reason they asked him is to, then it says, on the condition, it says Rav Unterman agreed to run again on the condition that I, Rav Ovadiah, also run. And he says, who am I running against? Harav Yitzchak Nissim. He doesn't even give Rav Nissim the title Hagaon. So why is it, if you read through this tshuva, Rav Unterman is Hagaon, Rav Yashiv's Hagaon, Rav Goren's Hagaon, not Rav Nissim? Well, that's because they are both from the same Iraqi community, and there was a lot of tension in this community, and especially if you know, when Rav Ovadiah Yosef starts teaching, he is a young man already, but he starts teaching classes, and he starts telling the Iraqis that they have to follow the Shulchan Aruch. It's in the land of Israel. It's the Atrei de Maran, the territory of the Maran Shulchan Aruch. And even if the Ben Ish Chai, and the Ben Ish Chai for them is like, I guess, like the Mishnah Berurah for Ashkenazim, even if the Ben Ish Chai says differently, you have to reject the Ben Ish Chai's position. So in Baghdad, in Basra, you follow the Ben Ish Chai. Here in Jerusalem, you have to now follow the Shulchan Aruch. There was such an outcry. They wanted to put him in Cherem. His book it's reported that it was burnt. Who was the opposition to him? Rav Kaduri actually led the opposition, and there were others. And the old Baghdadis were very, very opposed to Rav Ovadiah. He tells the story a number of different times. Rav Nissim is from the old Baghdadis. And as far as I know, Rav Nissim never signed any cherems or anything, but he did not defend Rav Ovadiah. He didn't stand by him. And he supported Rav Mordechai Eliyahu as someone. Basically, Rav Nissim saw Rav Ovadiah as a traitor to the Iraqi halachic tradition. And so there was a lot of bad blood between them. And anytime he mentions Rav Nissim throughout his writings, you could see he doesn't get the titles that he gives to the other rabbis. So then he says, I was also asked by the great rabbis, Rav Yashiv, Rav Jolti, Rav Goldschmidt, and other rabbis to run. And the question is, am I allowed to, though, unseat a rabbi? Well, he quotes a letter from Rav Yashiv here saying, are you allowed? Because he asked Rav Yashiv, well, am I allowed, do you think? And he says, I tell you that in my opinions, because of what's going on today, it's a mitzvah for you to run against Rav Nissim. And then you have a whole tshuva here of Rav Ovadiah Yosef explaining why halachically he is allowed to run and unseat Rav Nissim. Now understand, it goes both ways, because if Rav Ovadiah is permitted to run and unseat Rav Nissim, then Rav Goren is permitted to run and unseat Rav Unterman. And we're going to see soon what the Lubavitcher Rebbe says about receiving Rav Unterman, and where Moshe Feinstein says, but you have to have it both. You have to be consistent here. But he goes through all the different sources. Yes, there are sources that say you can't, but there are sources that say you can. In other words, and they interpret the sources that say you can't unseat a rabbi. That's dealing in a community where there isn't another Talmud Chacham. But if there is another Talmud Chacham and the community is not happy with this rabbi, they can unseat him. If you're looking for a heter to fire your rabbi, you can find it here. He gives you the sources that, the problematic one is the Chasam Sofer. We mentioned last week. The Chasam Sofer says that even though rabbinic contracts are limited by time, that's only to protect the rabbi. If the rabbi wishes to go to somewhere else at the end of the contract, he can take a different position. But the people have to hire the rabbi afterwards if he wants to. But he cites the views, Achronim, Rishonim, that first of all, there are places where this is not the minhag, and if the other rabbi is a bigger Talmud Chacham, you can say perhaps that the Chasam Sofer wouldn't disagree. The implication, of course, is that I'm a bigger Talmud Chacham than Rav Nissim. He cites he goes on lots of different sources. And then he concludes by saying that we know that Rav Nissim was elderly. He complained about his health, and he used to say that hopefully soon I'll be able to retire. So therefore we see he's not up to the job. Again, think back to our last president here. It's time for new blood. And then he says, therefore, I put myself forward and I was elected. So the vote was, I'll give you the vote here. I have the numbers. Rav Goren wins 89-59, and Rav Ovadiah wins 81-68. And it was a bit of a surprise, I think, for Rav Ovadiah, because Rav Nissim was supported by the Labor Party, the Likud party. His son, Moshe Nissim, was a big activist in Likud. In fact, his son, Moshe Nissim, later becomes justice minister. He had other appointments. He's the one that forced Rav Ovadiah Yosef out. The thinking was that they're going to extend the chief rabbinate instead of having these elections. And Moshe Nissim basically insists no, and he then put Mordechai Eliyahu in place. And this was like Moshe Nissim's revenge. He pushed out Rav Ovadiah because Rav Ovadiah pushed out his father. And the National Religious Party supported Rav Nissim, because Rav Nissim was a real religious Zionist. But Rav Ovadiah had the support of many of the Sfardim. And but I want to tell you, before we go further and then deal with what happens now, because it begins as soon as Rav Goren is appointed chief rabbi with the Langers, Rav Moshe Feinstein also comes out against Rav Goren. And here I thank... again, Moshe from Lakewood, who sent me this, which I'm going to show you now. And I didn't think this was online. And it's not an Apardes. Apardes is the rabbinic journal, which covered all these things and included everything against Rav Goren you can imagine. But Moshe searched, and it actually appeared in Ma'ariv, but I had never seen it. It's a Giloy Das, it says, from Agudas Rabbanim of America. And it should be Agudas Rabbanim Artos Race and Canada. If you look at their stationery, they always say "and Canada," and that's when I finish up my current project, and I decided to write a book on the Besamim Rosh. It came out of the classes we did. I'm going to return to my project Halacha in America. I'm still not sure whether I should include Canada, because when you think about Canada and America, it's like one system of halacha and ideas and. I don't know if Rabbi Mintz is including any tshuvot. There's some interesting tshuvot on conversion from Canada, Rabbi Price and Rabbi Felder. So I'm not sure about that yet. But he says in this letter here, this is from Moshe. He's the Nasi, as you can see. He says, when it comes to rabbinates in Israel, in all the diaspora, this is considered a srara, like a rulership, that a rabbi is not supposed to be pushed out all of his life. And it's not a question of parnasa to say that he has money. That if he doesn't have parnasa, you can. In fact, I'm going to read it better from the other one where you can see it better. It's typed up. It's easier to see here. He says it's not an inyan of parnasa, because even if the rabbi doesn't get parnasa from this, even if you continue paying the previous rabbi, ein harida miduasa, we don't remove a rabbi from his position. Then therefore, chas v'sholom, to think about removing Rav Unterman from the chief rabbinate and putting someone else in his place. Okay, well, this exact declaration from the Gudas Rabbanim also would apply to Rav Ovadiah. And what about the Lubavitcher Rebbe? This is where you get very strong sentiment. The Lubavitcher Rebbe is going to have two attacks on Rav Goren. One now, before he becomes chief rabbi, and then right after he becomes chief rabbi, because as we'll see, as soon as he becomes chief rabbi, he ends the Langer issue. Immediately, basically. Rav Goren, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, wait till you see what he says about Rav Goren in the Sikha. But in order to understand this, you have to know best that Rav Goren and the Lubavitcher Rebbe had an excellent relationship. Rav Goren describes coming to America in the 50s, in 1959, and 4 subsequent years, Yechidos with the Rebbe, 4 hours each. Now, according to Rabbi Walpole from Israel, who has a book called Shemen Sasod Mechaverecha, which deals with relationships of all the Gedolim to the Lubavitcher Rebbe, he says that Rav Goren also had Yechidus in 1972. I don't think so, although Nachum Shmayahu, correct me if I'm wrong, because Rav Goren, in his description, which I'll read to you now, he doesn't mention it. He simply says he was with the Rebbe 4 times for 4 hours. Now, I'm not sure the rest of the 60s. He must have come to America as well. But let me read to you what Rav Goren says. Now, I think this says a lot for Rav Goren, because when you see what the Lubavitcher Rebbe says about Rav Goren and how he basically tries to remove any authority from him, and Rav Goren didn't hold a grudge, or at least after the Rebbe passed away, Rav Goren didn't. He could have said nothing, but the Rav Goren wrote about the greatness of the Rebbe after the Rebbe's passing, and this was even though the Rebbe tried to really destroy Rav Goren's position. So let me just read you what Rav Goren says about him. What did the Rebbe say? The Rebbe said that Rav Goren has to withdraw. He cannot run for chief rabbinate because we don't remove rabbis. Simple as that. Furthermore, he says, he writes to him, and he says to him, where is it? He wanted him to be chief chaplain. He said he didn't even want him to be chief rabbi Tel Aviv. He says, you're doing such a good job in the army. But he wrote, in 1972, the Rebbe writes to Rav Goren and says, I'm going to tell you, we've always had a good relationship. I'm telling you straight what I think, because I don't want you to hear from someone else. I want to speak to you straight. The Rebbe says that my position has always been consistent. We do not remove rabbis. The halacha is like the Chasam Sofer, that we cannot remove a rabbi if he wants to remain there. And he says that he hoped that you, Rav Goren, would come to this on your own, this conclusion, especially since it's the irreligious who are your biggest supporters, and they are using your candidacy as part of a battle against halachic standards. In other words, he's alluding to the fact that Rav Goren's going to be appointed and he's going to deal with the Langer case, and perhaps even more, because Rav Goren argued that halacha can be more liberal than is being proclaimed at the moment. And then the Rabbi tells him something else, which is really interesting, and I didn't get it until I went back to the Gemara. Rav Goren, of course, got it because he knows all of Gemara in his head, backwards and forwards. I didn't know this. The Rebbe tells him that in this letter, in all matters of Kiddush Hashem, we have to be concerned with what the Jewish people think. And he refers to a Gemara in Yoma 86a. So I was curious what the Gemara says. It says it begins Isha Kel Nabisra. What does it say about Kiddush Hashem there? But it doesn't speak about Kiddush Hashem. I'll show it to you. It speaks about Chilul Hashem. The Rebbe was speaking what we call Lashon Sagi Nohar. He wasn't being explicit. The Rebbe said to Rav Goren that we have to be concerned in all matters of Kiddush Hashem. We have to be concerned with what the Jewish people think. But really, the Gemara, and he says, see the Gemara. If you know the Gemara, if you look at it, the Gemara is not speaking about Kiddush Hashem, it's speaking about Chil Hashem. The Rebbe, I guess, didn't have it in him to say to Rav Goren, you're causing a Chil Hashem. He tells him, Kiddush Hashem, we need to be concerned with, as the Gemara says. And you look in the Gemara, what does the Gemara say? What are the circumstances that cause a desecration of God's name? Rav said, for example, in the case of someone like me, since I'm an important public figure, if I take meat from a butcher and do not give him money immediately. In other words, the Gemara says, what's a Chil Hashem? When a big rabbi does something that the people are going to look at and think, not, they won't just think negatively of the rabbi, they'll think negatively of the Torah, because this is a rabbi and this is how he acts. The Rebbe is hinting to her. He's not saying it explicitly, but lashon sagi nohar, euphemistic language. He's saying, Rav Goren, we have to be concerned with Kiddush Hashem here, when really what he's saying is that you're causing a Chil Hashem. You're accepting the support of the irreligious with the promise to solve this matter, and that's a Chil Hashem. But let me add, and he gets stronger in the Sikha after the Rav Goren's elected. But let me just read you what Rav Goren says after the Rebbe passes away, because it says something about Rav Goren's character, that he was able, I don't know how long it took him to forgive, or maybe it never bothered him, but after the Rebbe dies, this is from Rav Goren's Sefer Mishnat HaGoren, and he begins by saying, this is on page 266 and on, that from the beginning of the Tnuas Chabad, by its first Rebbe, there have been 7 generations, and then he says that the Rav Menachem Mendel, just passed away, is the 7th, when the president of Israel, Shazar, who was a Chabadnik from his youth, when he came to the Rebbe, he didn't call him, the Rebbe did not call Shazar Nasi Israel. He called him the president of Israel. Why is that? Because the Nasiut of Yahadut, for Chabad people, the Nasiut of Yahadut shayachet l'Nasi'eh Chabad. That is, the real president, the head of the Jewish people for Chabad is the Rebbe, the Lubavitcher Rebbe. And he says that this national type of view for all of the Klal Yisrael is what led the Rebbe. So he didn't just deal in small matters, he dealt with the entire Jewish people. And then he says that Reb Menachem Mendel, Allah al kol nasiav hakodim shel Chabad. I don't know if a Chabadnik would say this language. He says that the Reb Menachem Mendel was raised himself above all previous Rebbes. I think in Chabad, I don't know if you judge the Rebbes and you rate them like that. And look, from an outsider, it's obvious that Menachem Mendel is greater in learning, greater in achievements and accomplishments than his father-in-law. So, I mean, I don't think there's any question about that. But for a Chabadnik, and we have a number who listen, they might get very angry at me, or they might just say, well, Chabad, we don't rate them. But he rates them. And okay, he's saying he rose above them because he built an empire. So granted, with the Baal Tanya, the Tzemach Tzedek, it could be great at Talmidei Chachamim, but they didn't build an empire. But I don't even know if modern Chabadniks would say that the Baal Tanya was greater Talmidei Chacham. I don't know. I don't know how they would deal with this. But he says the Rebbe was above them because he built an empire. And he says, I met with him a number of times. He says 4 times in 4 years. Zoh achar zoh. So that seems to mean back to back. And the first time he tells us was in 1959. I think he tells us here. He says each time I was with him for 4 hours, beginning at 11:30, and we went until like 4 a.m. And if you know the Rebbe could do that, who else could do that? And he said the Rebbe, who was older than me, he was fresh and I was exhausted. He doesn't say 59 here, but I know, at least from another source, 59 was the first year. And listen to this though. Rav Goren says that in each one of the visits, we spoke about everything. And I asked him the following question at the end of each visit, which didn't give me peace. Why doesn't the Rebbe come to Eretz Yisrael to visit? He has all these Hasidim there who want to see him. And he says that each time he asked him, the Rebbe gave him a different answer. The first time he says, because he doesn't leave Lubavitch. And if he leaves Lubavitch, he's going to go to Israel. And Rav Goren says he didn't know what he meant. It doesn't leave Lubavitch. He knows he lives in New York, not in Lubavitch. And And the Rebbe said to him, we've transferred Lubavitch. So Einanu Mitgorim Club in New York. We're not living in New York. Physically, we're in New York, but really we're in Lubavitch. So then Rav Goren says he asked the Rebbe, but wait a second, you go, it's well known, you go to your father-in-law's grave, and he says that it's one path, it's a pros. We just head from here to there and back. And he says, okay, I accepted it. He's not so happy with the answer. He says the next time he was there, he asked him again, why don't you go visit, not move, visit? And this time the Rebbe says he can't leave his followers in the diaspora without their leader. And he says that if he would go to Eretz Yisrael, he can't leave. That once he's in Eretz Yisrael, he can't leave Eretz Yisrael. It's a mitzvah. You have to stay in Eretz Yisrael. The third time he says he visited the Rebbe, and the Rebbe, he said they had many arguments about Medinat Yisrael and Sahel. So you wonder what they're arguing about. And then when he has to leave, he again says, why doesn't the Rebbe visit? And this time he says the Rebbe gave him a more complicated answer, and he says he wanted to visit, but as he was getting ready to make preparations to visit, he remembered that of all the previous 6 leaders of Chabad, none of them went up to Eretz Yisrael. And how could he break with this tradition? It obviously shows that it wasn't it wasn't such an important thing that you have to go there. And Rav Goren replied to him that they didn't go to Eretz Yisrael because there was no state of Israel and there weren't millions of Jews there. But now, if you were to go, lots of people would come. And then, the Rebbe says to him, if visiting of Israel is important from the Lubavitch standpoint, then they certainly would have visited, even if it would have been difficult. And if they didn't do it, it's a siman that there's heavenly reasons why we shouldn't go. And then Rav Goren says, I don't know much about the history of Chabad, so I accepted what he said. And Rav Goren says, every time I would leave, the Rebbe would give me a message to bring to Kfar Chabad. So he says, I had this message, and I went to Kfar Chabad, and I told them what the Rebbe said. And an old Chabad rabbi said to me that, there's a problem. He doesn't understand it. The Rebbe's father-in-law came to Eretz Yisrael. It's famous. I don't know how Rav Goren didn't know that. He was living in Israel. Was he alive? I think the Rebbe came, I'm not sure what year, late 20s, early 30s, one of them. But whatever, Rav Goren didn't know. And he was been a very young man. And the Rebbe went to Yerushalayim and to Hebron. So what's going on here? So then the next time he comes back to the Rebbe, and also he came in 11:30, and the Rebbe said to him, maybe he just knew through his mind, his prophecy, he was told by the people in Israel, he says, I know you have a question. Because Rav Goren presumably had a big discussion for Chabad. He says, you're asking, I told you I wasn't going to go, and because the previous rabbis didn't, and then that my father-in-law did go there. And he says, now I'm going to tell you the whole truth as to why I haven't visited there, even though my father-in-law visited there. He says that Avodas HaKodesh, the heavenly work of a Rebbe, of a Rebbe of Chabad, is connected with the holy graves of the previous Rebbes. All the bakashot, the requests in writing and orally, I bring, are brought to the kavarim, the holy graves, and that helps them go up to heaven. He said in his father-in-law's day, you couldn't go into Russia, and that's so he couldn't go to the graves of the previous Rebbes. That's why he went there to go to Hebron. He says, but I have the grave of my father-in-law, so I can go there. So therefore, there's no reason for me to go to Israel. And the old practice of not going, like the previous Rebbes didn't go, it applies. And Rav Goren says that this made sense to me. And he says, when I got back to Israel and I went to Kfar Chabad, people there also said that it made sense. And this is the real reason. That it's a tradition that Chabad never saw it as significant to go to Israel, and therefore the Rebbe doesn't need to go. And the only reason his father-in-law went, before Mashiach, let's say, and the only reason his father-in-law went is because he didn't have any graves, holy graves. And he has holy grave, the grave of his father-in-law. Now you could say, well, there's a lot of holy graves in Europe. You can go to the all the tzaddikim, but they mean Chabad grave, Rebbe grave. If you don't have a grave of a Chabad tzaddik, okay, so I guess you can go to the Avos. I'm not sure if it's better to go to Nasi Chabad before the Avos or better to go to the Avos or whatever it is. They each work. But if you have a chance to go to your father-in-law, the Rebbe, the Rayatz's grave, then you're putter from going to Israel because you have everything you need here and there's no Masorah and to go to Israel. No, it's not regarded as a necessary thing. And he ends that the Rebbe, that he didn't, no one remained like the Rebbe after his passing in terms of his godless, his greatness in Torah, in all aspects of Jewish thought, in his great leadership. And he says no one arose like him, not even in earlier generations. Now, keep these words in mind from Rav Goren when you hear what the Rebbe says, because as soon as Rav Goren is appointed chief rabbi, and we finally will get to the actual case, this is all leading up to it, Rav Goren brings together a beis din and frees the Langer children, and that's when the controversy really picks up. And let me take the questions now. Hold on a second. By the way, actually, one more thing. Let me, and I'll begin with this thing about Chilul Hashem next class. Can we just take the questions because it's already an hour? Let's see. Charlie, non-Jews do all the cooking for the patients at the Weiler Hospital in the Bronx on Shabbat. A mashgiach is present. Yeah, well, but I read you from the hold on. I read you from the Shulchan Aruch. If you look in Yud Zion, it says, or Tes Zion, the Ramah says, a non-Jew that cooks for someone who is sick on the Sabbath, the food is permitted after the Sabbath, even for those who are healthy. Okay. And there's no issue, no concern here of the prohibition of non-Jewish cooking. So we see here that there's no issue of Bishul Akum if the person is ill. Now, the Ramah says a non-Jew that cooks for someone who's sick on the Shabbos, the food is permitted after the Shabbos. Because like any other malacha done on Shabbos, I can tell you, though, that in Leeds, those of you from England might know Rabbi Yosef Yoshua Apfel, student of Rabbi Yaakov Weinberg. The old age home in Leeds, they wanted to cook food on Shabbos. Like you say, apparently, Charlie, you say that the Weiler Hospital, they're actually cooking, not just cooking the food, cooking it on Shabbos. So Rabbi Apfel writes to Rav Toledano, he was the based on the Sephardic based, and Rav Toledano gives a heter to cook food on Shabbos. The idea being that these old people are the equivalent of what we call chola sheish bo sakana, a sick person who it's danger, and the people, we've arranged for it ahead of time. You know, we're not telling them now to cook on Shabbos. They have a contract. So we know that if you have a contract with someone, let's say, to build your house, if he wants to build it on Shabbos, he can do that sort of thing. And Rav Toledano says that we all have milk delivered by the non-Jew on Shabbos. I can say we all have the newspaper delivered. The non-Jew delivering your milk on Shabbos, so how can you do that? You can do that because he's delivering it every day. You're not making a special thing from just to deliver it on Shabbos. You hire him to deliver the milk every day, and this is nivra, like this is included. So therefore, when he delivers the milk, it's okay. And so Rabbi Toledano said, in such a circumstance, since we already have that assumption, and these people are chola sheish bo sakana, therefore they can cook on Shabbos in the old age home. I guess cooking on Shabbos is even more because when they deliver the newspaper, they're doing it anyway. They're not driving to your house. They're coming anyway, so they're dropping it off. It's not such an issue. Cooking, though, they're cooking dafka for the Jews. It's not like today where you have an old Jewish old age home where most people are not Jewish. We're talking about a Jewish old age home. And it's an amazing heter. I don't know if others would agree with it. So, Charlie, you have to find out. Are you telling me they actually cook on Shabbos?
Yes.
Because cooking on Shabbos? So what's that? What's the basis of that?
I don't know, but the Orthodox Union certifies it.
You mean cooking or heating up, or you mean actually
cooking
cooking?
new food? I talked to the mashgiach. They do not have a way to cook before Shabbos and keep this food ready.
Okay.
They actually cook
So,
on Shabbos for the patients.
Okay, I thought this was like a radical ruling of Rav Toledano. Then I assume it's the same idea that these are considered chola sheyesh bo sakana, and the idea is we're not hiring them just to cook on Shabbos. They cook every day, and
They cook every day, same staff. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Uh, but it would only be. I think you need to also include the thing that old people need hot food. For people like us,
Yeah.
you can't do that.
Yeah,
Uh,
these are just for the patients in the hospital.
yeah, yeah. Okay. So interesting though. But if it's a mutter for the patients in the hospital, you come in, it's already been cooked. Are you allowed to eat it or not? I don't know. I have to ask the shaman.
That is an interesting question, and the
Because it's been done
cafeteria,
laheter.
yeah, the
Yeah.
cafeteria is actually open 7 days a week, and the entire community eats from the cafeteria except on Shabbat.
Well, if you're in a big hotel and they make the coffee for the dayan, you can drink the coffee. So here, but that's just because them making the coffee is not a problem. They're making coffee for dayan, so you can
Yeah.
drink it. But here, it's an actual. They can't make the food, but they only can make the food because there's a heter, and the heter is only for the old people. I would assume you couldn't eat it. I would assume it's just for the old people. Uh, it might, but again, ask your local rabbi. Marty says that he davens at Chabad, where one rabbi is from Australia. He goes home every Pesach, every Yom Tov. When he comes back, he's counting Sphere and Holy Shavuos the day before we do. Chabad is a very interesting shita. They hold you can't miss a day. You always have to go like west. You can't, if you go to Japan, you cannot cross the date line where you miss a day. And the Rebbe holds that your Sphira will be different than everyone else's. And as you say, Shavuos is different. No one else holds this. This is one of the Rebbe's unique halachic positions, that Shavuos is tied to the counting of Sphira, so you would have a different Shavuos. But I did think that Chabadnikim are told you're not supposed to travel during Sphira because of that problem. But okay, I guess not. What book am I quoting from, Paul? You ask. I think you meant this book. It's ostensibly it's Rav Avram Shapiro called Av the Torah, his like a commentary on Pirkei Avos, but it's not. It's just stories, mostly a lot of Ugdos van Hagos, and I'll give you a good story next class as well. Okay, it's Av the Torah of the Chochmah on Tractate Avos. Can't get it in America. I looked very, very hard. I found a Sfarim store in Israel that has it, and I was going to pay for it to be shipped. And lo and behold, the guy says in the Sfarim store that he knows someone who's coming to America in a couple days. So I went to Muncie and I picked it up. It was delivered, didn't have to pay shipping, anything, and it was very nice. Judy says, at that time, did Rav Sol Nature express any halachic opinion on the Langer affair? Yeah, we shall get to it. Charlie says many stop and shop in supermarket bakeries are kosher. Never seen a mashgiach present. Okay, Charlie, but you don't need a mashgiach. The issue is with meat places. You can have the most from hashgacha, and in a bakery you don't have mashgiach tamidi. You have yotzei v'nichnas, and according to this technical halacha, yotzei v'nichnas applies to any establishment, even a meat establishment. But the problem is you have mashgiach. He might come if he comes like every 3 months. That doesn't put the fear. The whole idea is you have to have the fear of the mashgiach on the person. So that's the real issue. Yes, yotzei v'nichnas applies. Absolutely, you can't get rid of that. It's halacha. The problem is it has to be yotzei v'nichnas enough that it has value. So
Rabbi,
they're saying
why
it's not
fear?
a.
Why
They're
do we
saying the
use the
CRC.
use? Rabbi, why do we use the word fear? Should be trust,
Well,
not fear. Trust.
what'd you say?
You're
Trust?
saying fear. Should not be
Fear,
fear,
yeah, fear.
Meshgacha. Should be trust.
No, not trust. The language they use is nirsas, is fear. They have to. We're dealing with non-religious people. A religious person technically doesn't need a mashgiach, but we saw how that worked out in Muncie with the Daf Yomi Magid Shir that was selling tarfus. So it would be better. It's the non-Jew needs to have a fear that he will be caught selling non-kosher products. That's the whole basis, and he'll lose his business. That's the whole basis of the Yotzei V'Nichnas. With that, if you have Mashgiach Tamidi, you don't need to worry because he's there. Yes, if you ask the Hashgacha organizations, they say that we will not give Hashgacha to someone unless we trust him. Because even with the fear, he could still maybe do tricks. But if you look in the classic sources, it's all about this fear. That's why we can drink regular milk. There's no mashkiach. Well, maybe now there is, but Ramosha's heter, it has nothing to do with that. It's that there's a fear that the company, if they try to play tricks and they're caught, they'll lose their entire business. So it actually is dependent on fear when dealing with the irreligious person, the fear that they'll be caught. And because we can't trust. I know this might sound bad, politically incorrect, Chaim, I don't know, but I don't make the rules. According to halacha, we don't trust non-religious Jews in these matters. Now, you could say, well, that's crazy. I trust them. Yes, you can trust them to lend you money, and you can trust them to watch your children. But in terms of halachic trust, because a non-religious Jew doesn't understand kashrus, so he might not think it's a big deal, or he might not. So in other words, we don't trust them. Not that we think they're dishonest. Even someone who's a totally honest, irreligious Jew, we can't trust them halachically. The one exception, and this is a big kula from Moshe Feinstein, which I think was accepted. He was asked about a Baal Tshuva. Well, actually, it wasn't. It applies to Baal Tshuva. He was asked about an elderly person whose children, married children now, his daughter-in-law, I believe it was, and his son, they're not religious, and he lives with them. So how could he eat at the house? And Ramosha says that in such extreme cases, and this has been applied to a Baal Tshuva with his parents, when we know that the parent or the child is going to do everything he will never cut corners or anything, then you can actually trust irreligious people. And I think it's a big kula from Ramosha. I'd be more inclined, if I was a posek, to trust the mother that she would give stuff to the son than a son to the father. Or maybe not, because half the parents think that the kid is crazy. He flipped out. So I don't know. It's a big kula. But otherwise, what would Baalei Tshuva kids do? They come back from college, let's say. They become more religious. They're not allowed to eat anything at home. So they have their own plates. But they can rely on the fact that the mother says she got this from the kosher butcher or something like that. But it's a question of halachic trust, which is not the same as another sort of trust. And by the way, this has to do with edim, witnesses as well.
Marc, if
Nissen
you don't
says
mind,
this Mahadran Pekud usage of basar kafu. I know they use basar kafu for Mahadran. They get the meat from Argentina. Mahadran would be, though, in Israel, if it's not Mahadran, it's not I think Mahadran meat is basically the same as what in America we call glat. But regular rabbanut in Israel is not glat. It's like we used to eat, the old regular kosher. And the fact that most American Jews don't really care about glat kosher is the fact that they go and they'll eat, other than the more religious, but your typical modern Orthodox will eat there. But according to what I've been able to determine, actually the Rabbanut Regila in Israel, this is what they've said, and I'm assuming they know what they're talking about, that even a regular Ashkenazi shouldn't rely, they say, on Rabbanut, because they adopt certain kulas that even in Europe, Ashkenazim didn't rely on. Like there's some leniencies of the Shulchan Aruch. Shulchan Aruch is strict. He says you have to have glat kosher. But he also has certain leniencies that the Ramah doesn't accept, and the Ramah is, of course, a big leniency. You don't need glat that the Shulchan Aruch doesn't accept. Apparently, in Israel, the regular Rabbanut uses the kulas, the leniencies, both of the Shulchan Aruch and of the Ramah. I don't know 100% if this is true, but this is what I read in Rabbi Jachter's book, so I assume it's true. Apparently, this was done in Morocco also. And if you go to Morocco, that's the only meat. So I don't know exactly, but they say it's less than regular. Because I heard on the news, I listened to some of the tapes he refers to, and I heard someone from either the OU or the Star K, one of them say that regular kosher meat is absolutely okay for Ashkenazi. We are not firmer than the Ramah. And but then he said something like, the reason today we offer only glat is because the community demanded that. I deny that. I reject that. I have no doubt that if the OU gave hashgacha to regular kosher, we all would eat it. I mean, people don't think that trying okay is reliable. That's why they don't eat it. It has nothing to do with glat. But then this rabbi said, But American Jews need to know that Rabbanut Regila is not the Ramaz kosher. It's less than that. And it's something that was never eaten by Jews in America and Jews in Europe. That is, it was eaten in Morocco, but it wasn't. So he said, when you go to Israel, you shouldn't lessen your standards because this is not regular kosher meat. But I was impressed that he said, absolutely. He says, we can eat regular meat. And for all of our trips to Italy, we had regular kosher. They didn't have glatt kosher. Now they do. The last time I went in the restaurants there, they told me that now it's considered glatt. But until like 3 years ago, all the meat in the restaurants and in France, in other places, and when you eat, and that's not Rabbanut Regila. That's like regular Ashkenazi non-glatt meat. So if you think you eat glatt, when you go to Europe, at least until recently in Italy, absolutely you weren't, and that's the case as well in other places. Charlie says the Vod of Queens certifies at least one pizza shop run entirely by non-Jews. I've never seen a mashgiach there. The Masorah in America is that you don't need to have a mashgiach tamidi unless it's a meat restaurant. Other than that, it's Yotze v'Nichnas, and I would not be surprised that if that restaurant you're talking about has cameras in it. Nowadays, many of the restaurants have cameras in it, and see, a pizza shop is more problematic than the bakery because you have cheese and all that. In a place in my town, they put in a. I'll tell you the story another time. How I was on the committee. The compromise was there's cameras everywhere, and that's a camera is fine. That's mashgiach tamidi because even if you're not there, you can always look back at it.
I'll check it out next time I'm there.
Yeah. Yeah, Zev, I don't think they'd mean greater than the Alter Rebbe, but the question is, would they say that the Alter Rebbe is greater than Menachem Mendel, or would they say that they're all equal? Now, Moshe, you could tell us. So the seventh Rebbe of Lubavitch always called his father-in-law Nasi Ador. Yes, he did call him Nasi Ador, and he thought that he portrays he's just like an appendage to his father-in-law. But the question is, what do the people think? I mean, in his first drasha, when he becomes Rebbe, he speaks about this. And
yes, but
yeah.
One of the interesting things that there are pictures. Every Friday after Mincha, he would walk out with 2 large bags of all the kvitlach he got that week.
Yeah.
And he would get in the Cadillac and go to the oil. And he spent several hours there. There are also reports of people who he would tell, when they'd ask him a question, he would say, that's a difficult question. I need to go discuss it with my father-in-law. I will get back to you. And most famous of all was the story of Gershon Jacobson, the founder of the Allgemeine Journal. Before he founded the Journal, when he was just a reporter on one of the Yiddish newspapers around 1960, he interviewed the Rebbe, and he had a lot of chutzpah. He said to the Rebbe, we know that you go to the oil and you talk to your father-in-law, but we always wonder, does your father-in-law answer you? And he reports the Rebbe said to him, yes.
So Moshe, I ask you this question. So the Rebbe was always mevatel himself to his father-in-law.
Yes.
But do the Hasidim view the Rebbe as being mevatel to the father-in-law? I would think not.
Well, it gets complicated because the other side of the coin is the messianic aspect.
Yeah.
Let me mention 2 articles I did in Modern Judaism about 10, 15 years ago. They're on my academia page. One of them refers to the menorah, which has messianic connotations, the Maimonidean menorah, and why it suddenly starts in 1982. And the other article is specifically about the grave visitation, connecting it to the yichudim that the Ari did on the caver of Rashbi, where the Ari would lie down on the caver and commune with the soul of Rashbi, and they would have a communication, a conversation. And my understanding of when the Rebbe went to the oil, that was the same sort of situation, where he would have a 2-way conversation with his father-in-law.
So that makes sense. He can't move to Eretz Yisrael because he needs to be near, as he
Yeah,
said,
of course.
to
Yes.
So I knew the first article, the menorah, but not the second. I'll check it out.
some related to Eretz Yisrael, somebody asked a question about the Frierdiker Rebbe going to Israel.
Yes.
I don't know if you're aware that after the Frierdiker Rebbe got kicked out of Russia, he took a trip around the world. He spent some time in Eretz Yisrael, and there's a famous story which I heard that he bribed somebody to go into the Maris HaMachpelah, into the mosque, which was forbidden for Jews. And they did this 3 weeks before the Hebron massacre in 29. And there's a whole machlokes whether that had any effect. He came to America. There's a famous picture of the Frierdiker Rebbe standing in front of the White House with his son-in-law, not the Rebbe, but the Rashag, and his Jewish and his lawyer, before they went in to see Herbert Hoover. The end of the story was that the Frierdiker Rebbe decided in the end to go to Otvatsk, a suburb of Warsaw, to establish the yeshiva there. And the purpose of this worldwide trip was to figure out where to, since he could not go back to Russia. He was in Russia, got kicked out, was in Latvia. Riga didn't work out, wasn't Jewish, whatever reasons. He was looking for a new home. And the home he ultimately found was in Otvatsk, outside of Warsaw. And clearly he rejected Israel as a place to settle, for whatever reason.
Yeah. As Rav Goren says, the Rebbe said there's obviously heavenly reasons why. So
Yes,
we'll leave it at
yes,
that.
yeah.
Thank you very much, Moshe, for that
Sure.
very enlightening thing. Someone privately says, one with this, that he thinks that in London, to this day, the meat from the London, the based in is not glatt. I'd be surprised. We got to check on that years ago, obviously. But but maybe, who knows? I don't live in London, although I'll be in London, God willing, in 3 weeks for London
I can
Jewish
tell
Book
you,
Week.
in Europe,
Yeah.
I come from 3 diaries of Katsovim and Menachers in Europe, in Poland. When my father came to America, he says the first time he ever heard of something called glatt kosher. It was a Hungarian thing that was unknown in Poland before the war.
Yeah, and unknown in Lita also.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you all, Moshe, and thank you all for staying on with us for so long. Rabbi Kelman,
If I
take
may
it away.
add a totally different wrinkle to this, nobody get upset at the end of class. A cousin, I guess, of Ilana, my wife's, whatever, a whole thing. Anyway, people won't eat Mahadrin. He's in the army. He's in Gaza in the army, and he refuses to eat Mahadrin food because that is supporting people who refuse to go to the army. So it put a whole different angle on that, and I thought that was a very important angle that people don't think of. It's like when years ago Danny Sperber was in Toronto, and he mentioned he never used to rely on the heter mechira because he felt halachically there are issues with it, but because recently this would be it's just like 10 years ago, the only way to get food and shmita without relying on the heter is to support Hamas in Gaza, to get the food in Gaza, and that's worse. So he's willing to rely on the heter mechira. So I just think we talk halachically. I think that's an important perspective.
It's a very important perspective. And Rav Aviner says, in opposition to what I read you from Chicago, all hashkachas are reliable if the Rav is reliable. Some are mahadrin, some are better. But the idea that you tell someone that it's not kosher what you're eating, he says that that's not the Jewish way. So different opinions.
Anyways, and the other thing I will add, Rabbi Tendler, many, many years ago, I can remember exactly when it was actually, because I was engaged at the time. And we went to hear Rabbi Tendler speak, and he was giving a talk on the important shuvas of Rav Moshe. This is 1992. And he said that the 3 most important shuvah, the number 1 most important shuvah of Moshe Feinstein was that all women can marry who survived the Holocaust, even if they had no evidence. Their husband was dead. And can you imagine that the brilliance with the stroke of a pen, he was met through thousands of potential agunot, and took a Rav Moshe to do that. People would say, how can we do that? Esherish, etc. And the second shuv he said it's important is this one on the parent eating at the home of the children who became non-observant. It was, of course, in Europe, it was the children who became non-observant, and the parent could eat at the child's house because you can trust the kid, even though they're not religious, to treat you kosher food, which you were alluding to before. So I just thought that was kind of interesting.
The third tshuva must have been that non-Orthodox marriages are not binding halachically.
So you know what? I don't remember now.
Because that was, if it wasn't for
that is a very important tshuva.
Everywhere.
Yes, there'd be a million mamzerim in America if we didn't rely on that tshuva, that non-Orthodox weddings don't count. Even though Ramosha thought they really do count, and of course they should count. But to free mamzerim, like Rebbe Goren wanted to do, he said that if you got married by a Reform or conservative rabbi, the wedding's not valid, and therefore if they get divorced without a get, the kid's not a mamzer, etc. So, yeah, that in practice is nowadays, I'd say, the most important tshuva.
Yeah.
And anyways, okay. And if you want to hear more about the history and what went on, and tomorrow morning, Rabbi Adam Mintz, 11 o'clock, History of Conversion in America, part 2 of the series, that'll be 11 a.m. tomorrow, and then Rabbi Shulman, then all our classes throughout the week. So anyways, everybody be well, and Laila Tov, let's hear good news. And all good things. Okay. Thank you very much, everybody. Okay.
Good night.
Time to go to bed, except if you live in California. But on the East Coast, it's already getting late. Okay, very good. Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Bye. Okay, bye-bye.